My Gavan and Melonin, and well met indeed. I am Arachir Galadirthan, head of the modding team behind Divide and Conquer, but welcome back to another Lorecast. This time dealing with an overview of Gondor, leading on from their intervention in the wars of Arnor in our previous episode. Before I begin though, my thanks go out this month to a gentleman named Thunder Chicken. Thank you very much for your ascension to the rank of Banner Marshal and all the support from you and the other Banner Marshals and Knights through the ongoing support of the channel. But without any further ado, I did just want to mention one thing. This is the first ever lore video where I shall be reading the entire thing from a script, so do let me know your thoughts at the end. But until that time, let's dive into it. So now, when we last visited Middle-earth, the nation of Arnor had fallen to the armies of the Witch King. Fornost was in ruin, Numenus lay abandoned, and Cardolan was naught but a vast green wasteland. The forces of Angmar seemed free to pillage and raid all of the lands of Eriador, from the farthest reaches of Forashel to the Gwathlo River in the south. Their celebrations, however, were short-lived. For a matter of only months after Fornost fell, news reached the Angmarim and the Witch King of a new threat, a great and glorious threat that had come from the south in answer to the call of the north. The Gondorians had come. The Gondorian army landed at Mithlond in the year 1975 of the Third Age and was well met by Círdan. The fleet was said to be so large that Mithlond alone could not harbour every ship, and both Forlond, the North Haven, and Harlond, the South Haven, took ships to harbour as well. Despite the vast size of the southern army, it was only a fraction of Gondor's power. Where Arnor had dwindled and waned, Gondor had prospered and waxed. The Gondorians were led by Eärnur, the heir to the throne of Gondor and the son of King Eärnil. Eärnur is one of few named Gondorian generals who were not king at the time of their great deeds, and he is listed amongst the greats of Gondor's military history. Eärnur and Círdan combined their forces in Lindon and wasted no time in marching on Fornost. The Gondorians had not come alone, however, and amongst their many ranks of infantry stood the famed cavalry of Rhovanion. Northmen who were already developing fame for their command of mounted combat and would, in time, give birth to the kingdom of Rohan. The combined army made short work of the journey to Fornost, but the Witch King then made a disastrous decision. Fat on his victory and overconfident with his army's capabilities, the Witch King left the safety of the high walls of Fornost and marched on the foe in the field. The two forces met in the lands between Lake Evendim and the North Downs, to the north-northwest of Fornost. The Witch King had hugely underestimated the power of the army of Gondor, and the battle swiftly turned in the southerners' favour. Angmar and Gondor were both nations of infantry, archers, swordsmen and spearmen they had in number, but cavalry they had few. Thus, the coming of the men of Rhovanion, who had lain in hiding to the north of the battlefield, utterly broke the Angmarim and scattered the stalwart forces who hadn't already broken. The battle was a mighty but easy victory, and the Angmarim, led by the Witch King, broke for Carn Dûm in the north. Eärnur led his own cavalry to chase down the fleeing Witch King, and they overtook him before he reached Carn Dûm. As Eärnur managed to corner the Witch King whilst the Angmarim flowed past in retreat, Glorfindel, lord of the House of the Golden Flower and leader of the cavalry of Imladris, arrived with a host of fresh High Elven cavalry. The newly come elves mowed down the fleeing Angmarim to the great delight of the Gondorians. Seeing that all was lost for the Angmarim, the Witch King pulled up from his flight, turned and bore down on Eärnur in a final attempt at claiming some small measure of victory. Mustering all the malice and wrath within him, the Witch King induced a bone-chilling fear in all who looked upon him. As he came closer, and all turned to flee, save for one, Eärnur himself. Alone he stood defiant in the face of this terrible wrath, but whilst Eärnur could endure the terror of the Nazgûl, his horse could not, and it bolted, bearing its rider far from the Witch King. The leader of the Nine let out a cruel laugh, but even the power of the Nazgûl is no match for the might of the Elves of Aman, for Glorfindel came then upon the Witch King, who fled in terror once again. Eärnur had regained mastery over his horse and returned with Glorfindel, but the mighty elf lord then gave his famous prophecy. "Do not pursue him. He will not return to this land. Far off yet is his doom, and not by the hand of man will he fall." The day was a complete victory for the Gondorians and the elves, and they ensured that no living thing that fought for Angmar was left alive between Linden and the Misty Mountains. Eärnur, however, upon his return to Gondor, did not forget the shame he felt at the Witch King's hands, and his story doesn't end there. But before we deal with the conclusion of Eärnur's tale, and indeed the conclusion of Arnor's tale, let us now go back to the founding of Gondor and work our way through the early years of this realm, so as to better understand the nation as a whole. Note that this is intended as a brief overview to Gondor and not a fully detailed history of the realm, but that possibly may come later. As with Arnor then, the realm of Gondor was established in the Second Age, after Eachalabeth, the fall of Númenor, in the year 3320 of the Second Age, to be precise. Isildur and Anarion were blown to the southern shores of Middle-earth and the cataclysm that drowned their homeland, and they regrouped and sailed up the Anduin to the land that had already established as Númenorian colonies. From the mouths of the Anduin up to Pelargir had long been held as Númenorian land, and the brothers found a welcome home here. They built the three mighty cities of Minas Anor, the Tower of the Sun, Minas Ithil, the Tower of the Moon, and between them, the great capital of Osgiliath, the City of Stars. Isildur took Minas Ithil as his seat of power, and Anarion Minas Anor. The realm is then shared between the two kings, and they sit side by side in the great hall of Osgiliath as joint rulers of the southern realm in exile. 109 blessed years of peace pass from the founding of Gondor to the first renewed attacks from the newly returned Sauron. His body was utterly destroyed in the downfall of Númenor, and Sauron is now cursed, never again able to take on a pure form. He will always be seen for what he is by the free peoples of Middle-earth, a being of dread and evil. His attacks on Gondor are relentless, and his forces are able to capture Minas Ithil with ease. Isildur is able, however, to flee the city, and manages to take with him a seedling of the White Tree of Nimloth, which he leaves with Anarion, who takes up defence of the southern realm as Isildur heads north to his father in Arnor. Anarion holds the forces of Mordor at the borders of the Efelduath, the Mountains of Shadow, and stops Mordor from flooding into Ithilien. In the north, Gil-galad takes counsel with his old friend Elendil after the arrival of Isildur, and the two resolve to deal with Sauron once and for all. And thus, the last alliance of men and elves takes form and begins its long journey to Mordor. Isildur leaves his youngest son in Rivendell and marches with the army. 12 long years later, after victory on the newly named Dagorlad, the battle plain, and after a grueling 7-year siege of the Dark Tower, Sauron is finally forced out of Barad-dûr into open combat by the last alliance. He meets Gil-galad and Elendil and Isildur in combat and is defeated. But Elendil and Gil-galad are slain in the duel, and Anarion himself had been slain a year or so earlier from a falling rock from the Tower of Barad-dûr. So, before heading north to take up the High Kingship in the aftermath of Sauron's defeat, Isildur proclaims Meneldyl, the son of Anarion, as the sole king of all Gondor. The time of joint kings is short and does not pass beyond the death of Elendil. Isildur begins his march north, but of course, he doesn't make it. His party is waylaid in the Gladden Fields, and there he is slain, which may even be a topic of a later video if we get to that point. Arnor and Gondor now begin their divergence and establishment as de facto independent realms. And from this point forward, Gondor rarely knows peace again. Wars with the forces of Mordor, the Easterlings, the Haradrim, the Umbrim mark the rest of Gondor's history. But despite this, for the next 1,000 years, the realm prospers. Gondor grows in wealth, power, and size, and whilst never really rivaling the realm of Númenor, it becomes one of the greatest nations in Middle-earth's history. At Gondor's founding, the realm consisted of land solely centred upon the banks of the Anduin, both east and west, but stretched up to the lands of the Nindalf, or to use its objectively better name, the Wetwang. Over time, however, successive military victories coupled with peaceful and civil expansion see Gondor's borders grow. For example, in the 490th year of the Third Age, so around about 500 years after its founding, the Easterlings first invade the realm of Gondor. They are utterly crushed by the then King Tarastar. Such is his victory over the men of the East that he takes the name Romendachil, or East Victor in Quenya. As is the conclusion of many a Gondorian king's life, he is then slain some 50 years later, and his son Turambar finishes what Romendachil started. Gondor's eastern border is then extended deep into Rhovanion to the shores of the Sea of Rhûn itself. Another 300 or years pass, and in the 800th-ish year of the Third Age, the first of the great ship kings takes the throne of Gondor. These kings were so named for they amassed great naval power in Gondor, and using their mastery of the sea, they further expanded the borders of the realm of stone. The four are named as Taranon, otherwise Falaster or Coast Lord, Tar-Kirian, Earnil I, and Kiryandil, otherwise Hjarmendakil, South Victor. The latter taking the name in the same vein as Tarastar before him by handing the men of Harad a crushing defeat, thus Southern Victor. In the time of Kiryandil, the fourth of these ship kings, some 1,250 years after Gondor's founding, the nation attains its greatest physical extent, stretching from the Gwathlo River and the southern border of Lothlorien down to the Harnan River in near Harad, and from Ibelegar, the great ocean, to the Sea of Rhûn in the east. Umbar is also in Gondorian control at this time, with Gondor holding the coastlands from the Harnan down to the Bay of Umbar. A vast, vast realm. It is, however, important to note that whilst the lands within these borders are de jure part of the realm of Gondor, in truth, many of them operate as client kingdoms, or indeed vast, empty lands of nothingness. Mordor, for example, is held by Gondor at this time, but is still largely depopulated and is mostly just an abandoned green wasteland. As with all peaks, there is only one way to go once you've reached them: down. And Gondor's power now wanes over the coming 750 years. And it is said that only with the coming of King Aragorn in the Fourth Age does Gondor ever reach the heights it attained under the famed ship kings. After these kings, Gondor is plagued with ineffective rulers who grow complacent and uncaring. There are some exceptions, but a pattern of poor governance forms hereafter. And whilst poor command might lead to decline in a nation, all-out civil war can utterly break it, and the kinstrife, next in the line of Gondor's woes, brings it almost to its knees. The story of the kinstrife begins with a tale of great friendship, though, and the power of an exceptional king. Not all the Gondorian kings in these waning years were wanting, and proudly standing out amongst the crowd is Romendachil II. He, like his forebears, takes the name East Victor after he reminded the world of Gondor's military prowess, and won a mighty victory over the Easterlings. His victory was achieved in part by the aid of the Northmen of Rhovanion and their leader, Prince Videgavia. Such was the friendship of Gondor and Rhovanion that Romendachil sent his son, Valakar, to live amongst the Northmen as an ambassador. Valakar grew to love the people of the grasslands and became enamoured with the daughter of Videgavia, one Vidimarvi. The two fell in love and had a son, and whilst Valakar lived in Rhovanion, they named him after the fashion of his mother's people, and he was named Vinitharia. In time, Valakar, his wife Vidumarvi, and his son Vinitharia were recalled to Gondor so that Valakar could become king. Upon his ascension, the whispers of his son's half-blood began. The proud and noble, pure-blooded Gondorians could not understand Valakar's marital decisions, and they would not stand to have a Northman on their throne. To assuage some of this animosity, however, Vinitharia took the name Eldacar, but little did it work to ease these tensions. Inevitably, Valakar passed away, and the day of Eldacar's enthroning came upon Gondor. The tension of the past years exploded and the kingdom divided. Many sided with the noblemen of Gondor who elected Castamir as the rightful king. Castamir was of royal blood, but his claim was far lesser than Eldacar's. The rest of Gondor either took a stance of neutrality or sided with tradition and took Eldacar as the king. Eldacar, it should be said, was much loved, as was his father, and indeed his father's father, Remendekil II, and he had that on his side. But war broke out. The kin strife began. The next 5 years are marked by a bloody back and forth in Gondor, with walls and borders forming all over the nation. The realm breaks apart, but Castamir is eventually able to usurp the throne and defeat Eldacar. The latter manages to escape and flees with his loyalists into the lands of his mother, back into Rivanion in the north. Castamir then ruled over a broken kingdom for the next 10 years, and proves, in truth, to be an ineffective and harsh and cruel ruler. But, after these 10 years, having mustered the strength of the north, Eldacar returns, and many who fought against him now take up arms to put down the bitter King Castamir. Eldacar is able to march through much of Gondor unchecked, and meets Castamir in battle at the crossings of Erue, south of Minas Anor. Eldacar defeats Castamir in single combat, but many Gondorian loyalists and usurpers fall in this carnage. The defeated survivors make for Pelagia, the unofficial capital of Gondor during the tenure of Castamir's usurpation. There they make sail for Umbar, and the last enclave of the usurpers, Castamir's grandsons amongst them, make it to the haven in the south. The kin strife ends, but the city and people of Umbar become a thorn in Gondor's side for the remainder of the Third Age, and it never truly again is held by the Gondorians in any great position of power. But Gondor's sorry tale does not just include war. As many of you will remember from the Arnorian histories, the Great Plague begins its dreadful march in the south of Middle-earth, and it utterly decimates Gondor. And this happens about 200 years after the kin strife. Nobility and royalty are not spared the cold hand of ever-reaching death, and King Telemnar and his family perish. His successor, King Tarandor, moves the capital of Gondor to Minas Anor, and parts of Osgiliath are now, and forever after, left abandoned after they are gutted by the plague, and it is again not until the time of King Aragorn that the city returns to splendour. Gondor's fortunes continue to decline until they are met by what is considered the third great blow, the coming of the Wainriders. The Wainriders were a confederation of clansmen out of Rhûn who rode to war on the back of great chariots or wains. And in truth these are more like wagons than chariots, large, vicious machines of war. The Easterlings were stirred up by the malignant power of Sauron, ever turning the weak and easily led to his cause. They came upon Gondor from north and south in connection with the peoples of Khand and Harad. They were completely unchecked in their initial advance, but Gondor is able to take a stand, and a bitter war begins, lasting for nearly 100 years. 100 years of skirmishes, land gains and losses, but most importantly, spilled blood. Gondor simply cannot advance as a nation whilst its young men are being sent to die in the lands of Near Harad and on the battle plain of Dagorlad. However, in 1944 of the Third Age, and circling our story back around to the start of this episode, a young man steps into the tale from this backdrop of barbarity: Eärnil. Eärnil was naught but a simple captain when he was called to honour in southern Gondor, and he led the Gondorians to a crushing victory over the confederation of Wainriders and their Haradrim and Khandish allies. The southern campaign of the Wainriders' invasion finally comes to an end. But fortunes in the north did not fare so well, and Gondor's king Ondahur is slain by the Wainriders, his sons Artamir and Faramir having already fallen before him in battle with the same. The enemy makes camp in Ithilien and begins to celebrate what they see as the beginning of the end of this long and tiresome war. They have finally killed in battle Gondor's king. Unbeknownst to them, however, Eärnil, fresh from his mighty victory, has force-marched his forces north, and Eärnil and his forces come upon the Wainriders when they are deep in revelry or sleep, and he catches them completely unawares. To call the Battle of the Camp a battle is to do Eärnil a disservice, for in truth it was a massacre. Gondor utterly broke the Wainriders and ended the long war for good. Eärnil is lauded as a hero and a true-blooded Gondorian. But in the aftermath, succession to the throne must be decided, for Ondahir, Artemir, and Faramir were all slain. Not Faramir of later years, of course. Ondahir was only survived by his daughter, Firiel. And Firiel, in the years before, as many of you may well know, wedded the final and last king of Arnor, Arvedui, the ill-fated hero of the north, who carries with him the burden of prophecy, for of course his name means last king. Naturally, as the husband of the rightful heir and as king of the northern Dunedain, Arvedui claims the throne of Gondor. However, the Council of Gondor, led by the steward Pelindur, whilst from a noble position, reject his claim, and they reply to him thus: "The crown and royalty of Gondor belongs solely to the heirs of Meneldyl, son of Anarion, to whom Isildur relinquished this realm. In Gondor this heritage is reckoned through the sons only, and we have not heard that law is otherwise in Arnor." Arvedui, however, not taking rejection lying down, he hits back, and he says Elendil had 2 sons, of whom Isildur was the elder and heir of his father. We have heard that the name of Elendil stands to this day as the head of the line of kings of Gondor, since he was accounted the High King of all the lands of the Dunedain. While Elendil still lived, the conjoint rule in the south was committed to his sons, but when Elendil fell, Isildur departed to take up the high kingship of his father, and committed the rule in the south in like manner to the son of his brother. He did not relinquish his royalty in Gondor, nor intend that the realm of Elendil should be divided forever. Moreover, in Númenor of old the sceptre descended to the eldest child of the king, whether man or woman. It is true that the law has not been observed in the lands of exile, ever troubled by war, but such was the law of our people to which we now refer, seeing that the sons of Ondahir died childless. Gondor did not answer, and the throne was denied to Arvedui, leaving the realms divided. There are many who regard this decision as the very feature of the prophecy upon which Malbeth actually named Arvedui, or indeed instructed his father to name him. The Dunedain chose at this instance what they perceived as the more hopeful of 2 choices. Option A, take a king from a realm on the edge of defeat. Seems relatively hopeless. Option B, take a king who we can elect from Gondor and may well be beloved of the people. And they choose option B, to them the more hopeful choice. Had they taken Arvedui, then we can safely state that the history of Middle-earth would have been much changed. But of course, Arvedui was denied. And with his denial, the council turns to Gondor's favourite son, Eärnil, the hero of the War of the Wainriders. He himself was of royal blood, though not as closely linked as Arvedui was, and he reluctantly agrees and takes the throne as King Eärnil. He is a man who gives credence to the legends of Númenor, and he carries honour and virtue in high regard, and he pledges to aid Arvedui should Arnor come to the very precipice of disaster. Gondor will not forget the Northerners, even though they may have rejected their king's claim. Only 30 years later, Arvedui calls for Eärnil to honour his pledge, as the Witch King's final assault on Arnor and Fornost had come. Eärnil immediately sets about mustering an army to head north, but as we saw from the beginning of this episode, they arrived to Arnor 1 single year too late, and the northern Dunedain become a scattered and defeated people. After scouring Eriador of the servants of the enemy, the Gondorian army returns home, but, as aforementioned, its captain, the son of King Eärnil, Eärnur, returns home in what he thinks is total shame at the hands of the Witch King. 27 years come to pass, and the Witch King rears his invisible head in Gondor once more, and with overwhelming force he comes upon the great city of Minas Ithil and claims it for his own. And with it, the capture of one of the great Palantiri of the West. At this time, about 2,000 years into the Third Age, Minas Anor is finally renamed to the name many of us know it by, the Tower of God, Minas Tirith. Minas Ithil is now dubbed Minas Morgul for the dark sorcery that the Witch King brings to the place. Some years later, Eärnil finally passes, and Eärnur takes to the throne. But in all the long years since the victory in Angmar, he has not forgotten the Witch King, nor the shame he felt at the great Dark One's hands. The Witch King, knowing of this crippling shame, challenges Eärnur to a single combat, to a duel, to decide what happened all those years ago once and for all. For 7 years, Eärnur is persuaded against this suicidal folly, but eventually, at the issuing of another challenge from the Witch King, he breaks. Eärnur leads a small host of knights, counted on a single hand, and they march up to the gates of the Tower of Sorcery. And when those great black gates close behind Eärnur and his entourage, none of them are ever seen again. Eärnur is presumed dead by the council, and no pure-blooded royal descendant, or at least none with great wide public support, can claim the throne. The time of the kings closes with a whimper, and the rule of Gondor is given over to the stewards and the lords of the fiefs. And that ends our whistle-stop tour of the major events of Gondor's early history. I hope to next bring you the major events of the latter half of the history of the Land of Stone, and thereafter we may well jump back to the beginning to discover how the journey of humanity through Arda began. But for now, that is going to be all. So I do hope you've enjoyed this episode. I would welcome your feedback. And until we speak again, dear friends, thank you again to all of those who support the channel on Patreon, or indeed just by watching each week. And until we speak again, Navarne den Pedimad Melonin, and farewell.